So for today, I want to introduce our guest, and really this is not a guest. This is one of our founding ministers of the church, Anya de Marie. And I have a little bit, let me find it real quick here. I'm going to read just a little bit about her before we get started, just so you know who she is. So, Anya de Marie is an educator, dancer, and organizer living in Oakland, California. As a scholar of metaphoric philosophy, she has been researching and teaching with Dr. Judy Gran for more than 10 years. As a faculty member of the Women's Spirituality MA program at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, she taught courses in psychology, arts, activism, and feminist theory centered on the metaphoric theory of ritual origins. By the way, I'm going to have to ask her, what is the metaphoric theory? That's just a fascinating word. But continuing on, a nonprofit professional since 1999, Anya currently works as a lead trainer with MISSEY, which stands for Motivating, Empowering, Supporting, and Serving Sexually Exploited Youth, where she previously served as Director of Operations. She leads trainings on CSEC, Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children, to City of Oakland staff, including all Oakland Police Department and Oakland Fire Department staff. Anya is also project manager at Courage to Resist, a nonprofit dedicated to ending militarism and empire through organizing support campaigns for conscientious objectors and whistleblowers, such as Chelsea Manning. From 2014 to 2016, Anya published a series of articles for Occulture, which is that's spelled OAKULTURE, called Women Running It, which profiled women in dynamic positions of cultural leadership in Oakland. In 2015, she began producing Oakland Flamenco Sessions, a concert series that promotes artistic improvisation and collaboration among local flamenco dancers and musicians. Anya is a flamenco dancer, has been a performing artist of Haitian and Cuban Haitian dance forms, and previously danced with the all-star band Alta Cali. With family roots in the area of Houston, Texas, she is both city and country. She's currently researching and writing Potato Candy, a book about her family's Texan Wendish heritage, cultural assimilation, memory, and textiles. So, with that announcement, proud to welcome Anya. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you. I'm very honored to be here. Thanks, James.
Thank you. Well, we thought to begin today, we're going to try something. We'll see if it works or not. We thought as a way to begin our conversation to give a little bit of a taste of what we're talking about. Today's topic is the spirituality of dance, the spirituality of the body. Something, again, concepts that have been very threatening and frightening to many in the West. So we're going to try playing a video. And while I'm getting this set up, Anya, would you like to introduce the video?
Sure, I can do that. So let's see. About a month ago, as many of y'all may or may not know, with Courage to Resist, we have a campaign right now which is calling on and encouraging those in the armed forces to refuse deployment to the southern border or to be involved in the construction of the immigrant concentration camps that are in process right now. So as a part of that, we did an event recently at Soul Space here in Oakland. And as this bio said, I'm a student of flamenco and a dancer here in the Bay. And many of us in the flamenco community are very angry and upset about what's happening right now, as many people in the country are, I think. And particularly, I am working with a dancer who's from El Paso, which is right, the camp where the thousands of children are being held right now is in Tornillo, which is right outside of El Paso. So I asked a few flamenco performers if they would be interested in opening our event with a flamenco performance as a way to, one, flamenco is an art form of resistance, as a way of using this art form in a traditional context. Two, as a way of allowing us to use our art form as a way to speak back and express some of the feeling and anger that much of us feel. And I think oftentimes in activist events, we, at least I should say in my experience here in the US, we tend to immediately come from a headspace and a approach of fighting things with our head and our minds. And I felt like it would be a useful way to start out our event by centering us on our feelings, and sometimes our feelings of hopelessness limit our sense of possibility. But I think that expressing feelings of anger and grief and rage can put us in a different position of how we then can interact and engage when having a conversation about something like this that's so horrendous. And just a way to have some sort of an offering to begin with for the kids who are currently being held in Tornillo. So that would be how I'm going to set up this video. Hopefully it works. We did this at the beginning of the event. So the performers, there's some of the performers here in the Bay. David White is our singer in this piece. The dancer is Melina Burkov Rojas. The guitar player is Gopal Slavonek. And the choreographer, who I mentioned, who's from El Paso, her name is Bianca Rodriguez. In the Bay Area, we're very fortunate. We have one of the best flamenco scenes outside of Spain. And so we have a wealth of committed students and practitioners of flamenco, but also quite a few who are also politically involved and engaged as well. So that's why I invited these people to do this performance. Flamenco is an art form from Spain, particularly more from southern Spain, from Andalusia. It is an art form that has Jewish, Moorish, folk, and other influences, but it's an art form of the Gitano people, of Roma people from southern Spain area. The Roma people, if you're not familiar with Roma people, they're survivors of a significant, phenomenal amount of oppression, ethnic cleansing, and violence throughout Europe. That the recognition of what Roma people are still surviving, and a global movement in response to that that's appropriate has yet to happen, but I think that we're on the way. The art form does grow up, though, in all of this context. Traditionally with flamenco, what you have is you have a singer, you have a guitarist, you may oftentimes have a dancer, and you'll have people clapping, playing palmas, so palmeros. That is the context of this piece that we're going to watch.
Toma. ¡Ale, guapa!
Watched it live, I was deeply moved, and I had some imaginings about what the story was, but it was just that imagining. So I'm curious what you could share that might help to inform.
Sure. Well, I wanted to tell y'all at least one of the letras, or the verses, the words of the piece. So traditionally in flamenco, you have verses or letras, and that verse might be made, they're known by the person that made them up, and then they're continued and sung and passed down. When a singer is singing, flamenco is, sometimes it's called the jazz of Europe, because it's an improvisational art form in a way. The singer, the dancer, the guitarist, and the palmas players too, really, which are the rhythm section in a way, they're constructing it as they go. So each verse isn't necessarily connected to the one before it. They're each separate. So it's different. There are some canciones or songs that, it's in like what we think of as an American song, right? But in large part in flamenco, each verse is not connected to the one before it. So the first verse that he sung, It's a soleá from La Cerneta. That the translation is that first letra speaks about, says, I have such an intense feeling. This is a rough translation. I have such an intense feeling when I see you that I think if I were to be given the penalty of death, I would not feel it. So oftentimes in flamenco, the feelings or emotions or stories that are being told are about significant loss, death, pain, intense feeling or emotion. That first letra, obviously, it may be, we can attempt to translate or understand. We don't really know what all that was involved in the creation of that letra, but while it also obviously references a romantic love, it's also has to be pointed out that a death penalty is a part of the common experience for Roma people, right, at that time, and also it is referencing what is it to feel what is the possibility outside of that. The second letra is the one that really gets me, meaning the second verse that he sang. And I did get the letra here for you. It says, fui piedra y perdí mi centro, y me arrojaron al mar. It means I was a rock and I lost my center, and they threw me in the ocean. And then it says, al cabo de mucho tiempo, mi centro viene a encontrar. After much time, I will refine my center.
What do you think that means, that idea of losing one center and finding my center?
I don't want to be in the position of needing to flamenco letras are a part of the art form is it has multiple meanings always.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so there's not one single meaning here.
No, and by the moment, the singer, the dancer, how it's felt, what's accentuated, what is communicated or conveyed at that moment, it can have different significances too, right? But to me, David White, the singer, I spoke with him about how he felt about singing these songs. And he said that for him, when he was singing that letra particularly, for him it really brought up the reality of the refugee crisis, not only here on the border, but in Europe, historically with borders. For me, it brings up this reality of that. A lot of what we are hearing spoken about in headlines now is immigrants trying to cross the border. But in reality, the borders cross us. We don't cross them.
Okay. Well, Anya, is there anything else you'd like to share with us about what we saw before we move into some of our other conversations for today? Anything that you maybe a casual observer might miss? I mean, one thing that jumps out at me, this isn't a subtle thing at all, but I was struck by the moments in this offering where that particularly the female dancer, there was a sense of defiance, this sense of no. What could you say about that, or anything else, really?
Sure, you're right to point that out. When I earlier spoke about many of the themes in the letra, what I neglected to say is pride and resistance, which is central as well in flamenco. You're entirely right. Flamenco, there's often from the waist up, there's a posture is of pride, and also a lot of the movements and turns. There's a lot of fierce, quick cutting turns. I have read and spoken to some flamenco scholars and artists who speak about the part of that is as you said, exactly as you said, an expression of resistance, refusing to be cornered, refusing to be boxed in or held in some way. This fierce, fast. The footwork oftentimes can be very, very fast and powerful. At other times, obviously, the footwork can be slow and steady, but always in rhythm. Always in rhythm, never out of compás.
Mm-hmm.
I think that as I can say for myself as a student of flamenco, um, and in terms of tying it with this conversation about spirituality, the challenge for myself always to how can I live more fully into my own pride of self, my own pride of understanding value in receiving gifts and artistry and um, what I received from my ancestors and living up to that and standing in the pride of that. That's
Mm-hmm.
how we move. That's how we change the stories we live in.
Sure. By the way, these letras, how old are they? When did they first begin to be written, and how old are the ones that we heard performed today?
Oof. I couldn't give you exact years. The first two were, I believe, they're Las Sernetas,
Mm-hmm.
and so from late 1800s, probably around that time, early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
Probably most of them
Mm-hmm.
from around that time frame.
And also, I was going to ask you, how did you get involved with flamenco? What first drew you to this tradition?
I saw it. I
Mm-hmm.
saw it once, and I cried. I bawled the whole time, and
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was the art form for me, for my life.
Fantastic.
I've been a dancer since my whole life since I was a child, but flamenco. I'm young in terms of flamenco studies. I've only been studying for about 6 years. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I'm consistently deferring to those who know more than me.
Sure, sure. Well, there's something really good about that kind of humility because it keeps us in the position of being a student. I think there's something really important about that. And
Mm.
I think it's easy to lose sight of that. When we start to think we're an expert, at that point, we quit learning. So I appreciate your attitude a great deal. What we do want to mention real quick before we continue in this conversation, we want to greet those who've come on so far. We really appreciate everyone who watches live. It just helps us to me what the live. We could pre-record things if we wanted to, but we do these live because we want to have the opportunity of connection, the opportunity for there being some real dialogue. And some of our past episodes, we've had some really great comments from our viewers. So I encourage you, if you have things that you want to say, thoughts you have, please post them either on Facebook Live or on Zoom. We always, towards the end, have a special time that we take out for reading comments occasionally, though we can actually talk about them along the way when it makes sense to do so. So don't hesitate, send us your comments. And also, if you're new to the Objector Church, please check out our website, objector.church. Now I wanted to move our conversation a little bit into discussing the idea of the role of the body in dance and spirituality. And part of the reason I wanted us to talk about one specific form of dance, one specific cultural expression, is I think sometimes it helps us not just to talk in generalities, but to actually have some specific thing to grapple with. But I'm also do want to move out a little bit more in a more general sense and to talk about that role of dance. And I think for myself, one of the things that in my experiences, I grew up in a tradition that was very scared of dance. In fact, it was forbidden to dance. A church tradition I grew up in, it was you don't dance in the churches of Christ, at least when I was a kid.
Mm.
But as I got older, and particularly as I learned of my family's Native American heritage, I started going to some Native American powwows here in Oklahoma. And these are intertribal events. What the dance that happens at powwows in Oklahoma, and there's really two strains of this, a Southern Plains tradition and Northern Plains tradition, but it is a bit of a pan-Indian kind of tradition where the different tribal backgrounds have merged together, and there's certain dance styles that have become sort of for lack of a better word, canonized. That these are the styles you dance in contest. And so that was my beginning in that. And then later, I became introduced more to the idea that there's other forms of dance that are not done at powwows. In the Cherokee tradition and some of the tribes originally from the southeastern U.S., others, there was the idea of the stomp dance, an all-night time of connection, of engagement with the divine that looked very different than what I saw at the powwows. But for myself, and this is just having these vague inklings of understanding, I started seeing that there was something in me that was stirred, and my understandings of the divine and my understanding of connections to other people that was very different at a powwow than what I felt in church. And I felt like over time, I really came to the conclusion of that there was something missing in church that I got in the powwows. And so that's my experience. I know that for you, you have this experience with flamenco. I know other people have many different experiences. And so I'm curious, several things. One is, why has the Western tradition largely been so scared of dance and the body? What do you think about that?
Well, I think the question of even the question of what is, if we ask this general question of what is the role of spirituality, of dance and spirituality in the body, for example, it's a flipped question, right? How can there be spirituality without the body?
Mm-hmm.
We're animals. We want to forget that, but we're animals. We live in bodies.
Yeah.
So. Part of my answer is that part of what happens with the development and increasing power of male-centered religions or male-centered stories or paradigms that we live in is that what gets maintained and told and focused on is male-centered practices more often. But if you look around the world, and indigenous cultures around the world and women-centered practices around the world, they're very centered in the body. It's this patriarchal male-centered lens that tells us to evolve, we need to leave our body. We need to, it's this elevating up idea. And I think that we've been challenging that, but it's well past time for the rug to be pulled out from under that one, because it's not really going to get us to quality of life now in relationship with others that we need in order to enjoy our life and share what we're given, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me that so many of the cultures that still value dance as a spiritual cultural expression are cultures that may still have more of a matriarchal or matrilineal even formation of society. And I'm thinking again in many Native American cultures, and there's plenty of sexism there as well. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but there still is at least the memories in many tribal cultures of times when your identity was formed through your mother's family and that when a marriage happened, it was often the husband joining the wife's family. And it's interesting to me that in those cultures that have that kind of emphasis, dance still has a bigger part. And I think that's interesting to me.
Well, I think for me, I use the term woman-centered because I think it's very useful. It means that, and the contrast to that, male-centered, means that when our frame is males, and typically white males, are in the center of what we consider to be normalized or central to experience, and everybody else is around that. Women-centered, that term is useful to me because it flips that, and it says that no, there's a place for all of us in our experiences and our bodies, lived experiences, to be in the center of that. And when you have, I would argue that if you look around the world, most indigenous cultures are women-centered in some way. The history, the way through violence and repression and ethnic cleansing that's been taken away from what is generally known about the story, or the way to which people have been able to hold on to their knowledge or practices or traditions, varies. But I think you see that around the world, cross-culturally. That is. And if we look in our own, I think it's really important to look in our own histories, our own ancestry, our own families and lineage and tradition, and also where we live. And if we ask and if we pay attention to those questions, we can find where are clues to where is embodied and centered practices, right? Or spirituality, as you're saying.
Okay.
I think one other thing I want to say is, we oftentimes, when we think about now, right, in the West, the idea of spirituality is like almost this new idea and term also, right? A new way to frame something outside of the standard hegemony of religions. But when it's introduced, and also when it's being sometimes marketed in a new way, what gets exposed or shared is more often male-centered practices. So, for example, focusing on meditation, breath, being still, practices of the mind. A lot of times, what are not being shared as women-centered practices, which tend to be more embodied. There will be more ecstaticness involved in them, more movement involved. It looks very, very different. And neither of those are mutually exclusive at all whatsoever. But I do want to point that out because I think that's really important. Which stories, which practices get told, which dances are maintained. Oftentimes in some dance forms, oftentimes perhaps it's male practitioners who are the ones who get to travel outside of their country and share that art from around the world. So very often it ends up being more what we see and name as, oh, this is what that dance is, or this is what that practice is. It's like everything. It's going to be framed by who gets to be the teller, who gets to be the sharer, who gets to be the listener. All of these things are involved.
Well, it's interesting. I think about that in the Native American context and what I talked about earlier about in the powwow circles, how that there's certain dances that become very standardized. And partially this also goes into the role of the contest in the powwow circles. And I wonder that may be a gender dynamic as well, because I look at the kinds of dances that are often the most celebrated in the powwow circles are the flashiest, and they tend to be the ones done by men the most. And I wonder how much of that is, frankly, a colonized mindset has enabled certain dances to be expressed and shared and in a more public setting, and other dances to either be neglected or only be shared in more private settings. And I wonder, especially in that context, in a lot of other contexts, to what gets chosen and should be shared and what doesn't, and how does those gender dynamics play into that?
I don't know anything about traditions or tribes or peoples in Oklahoma or their dances, but something that I can share that's helpful for me, and this comes out of the field of feminist geography, is an understanding also, in addition to what you're saying, of the role of public and private, and also male societies and female societies in many cultures traditionally around the world. You have what is done and always, let me be clear, always LGBTQ people's role of translation and gatekeeper between all of these societies, right? But I can break it down this way. Oftentimes, when you have Western male anthropologists will go into a community, right? What do? They go to talk to the men, to ask the men, okay, what do you do? Da da da. If we're in a society where women's geography is in a more internal space within the home, within complexes, within particular knowledge-bearing areas, and men's geography more often is in a external place. How that's going to look to an outsider, a white male lens from the outside, is quite different than what that is understood to be from within that culture. So often, a lot of times, it's also what is deemed to be appropriate to share with outsiders. And if the continuation of practices and traditions for years has been based upon the ability to shield them from outsiders, then it's also about strategic continuation of legacy. What is shared with the outsiders and appropriately. And we owe, my perspective is that we owe a lot to people who have done all they can to preserve and fight to maintain and protect certain traditions and lineages. Everything isn't right to know.
Well, I think it's a great. I think one more thing I want to talk about before we transition a little bit is that what you said. Everything shouldn't be known. How would someone, let's say someone who is inspired when they see cultural expressions of dance, it stirs something in them? How is the appropriate way to go and learn, to go and participate? Are there appropriate ways? Are there inappropriate ways? And again, I'm thinking about for our viewers, if for anyone out there who's saying, I want to engage more, I want to connect, and yet there's a lot of fear sometimes that we may do so in the wrong way. Could you share a little bit about that?
Culture appropriation 101. Let's see, what do I do? Well, we have the internet and we have social media, so there's no limit on being able to find who are the radical voices right now, who are the voices who have integrity, that are trying to protect practices. So go online and use a critical lens. Find the activist groups who are working to protect, and listen to what they're saying. I also pay attention to young people. Young people always lead us forwards. Find the young people on Instagram, and what are they saying about what needs to be protected and listened to and honored and respected right now. I'm a scholar too. I love to read, so I go online and I do my research, and I say, who are some of the voices that are really saying something that is interesting right now. So I'll read their books and listen. I think it's about listening to people from that own community. What are they saying?
Excellent.
I think that's key. And also I think that knowing your own, I think the other side of that is knowing your own ancestry and heritage and practices. I think that's just as important, as a place of what is the ground that I stand on as well. What is my relationship with my ancestors is as equally as important. And third is like the honoring of art and its power to communicate, right? Its power to hold spirit. That just honoring of that, I think, is really important, and the recognition of that power, which can impact everybody, right?
Absolutely.
But how does it impact us to action? Right? How does it impact us to be a part of our world being better and being more livable for everybody?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we chose this topic today. Was, to me, it really fit in with the mission of the Objector Church. We are seeking to bring about cultural change of people being more kind and loving to each other, respecting other people, and part of that is the realm of culture. I mean, that's where human beings connect with each other. That's how we make sense of the world. And by reviving some of the older traditions, I think it gives us some ground to stand on, and some new places of re-engaging that's not mediated by consumer culture, but something else. So, well, we could talk about this all day, but I do want to switch gears a little bit. In all of our webcasts, we have a time of inspiration, which you've just been hearing. We now move into a time of information, and this is about the practical ways that we can work for peace and justice in our communities and our lives. And so one of the things that Anya and I wanted to talk about getting ready for this was, we've noticed, and I'm hearing from others as well, that there is a growing surge of interest among members of the military in seeking legal assistance. And we've seen this, I've seen this as an attorney. I'm getting more calls all the time now. And we're not quite sure all the factors behind it. We've wondered, certainly the border situation has to be a factor. People facing either the deployments themselves, or just seeing the deployments as a symbol of what the U.S. military is really all about. And I think sometimes for some folks who may even, I mean, your typical young person who enlists, by the way, the majority of them, and we know this statistically, majority money is a big factor, huge factor of just wanting a better life, wanting stability, wanting security. But for many others, a significant number, it's they want to make the world better, they want to make the country better, and they believe in the national myth that the United States of America is a good and just society that has a positive influence in the world. And so my theory is that some of those young people, when they see things like what is happening on the border now, it undermines that. It makes them question, what side am I really on here? And so I'm excited and enthused that these questions being asked. I'm also really worried right now that will there be enough infrastructure to meet these needs? There are a lot of groups out there. The GI Rights hotline is critical. In fact, I'm going to real quick, their website is girights.hotline.org. But let me look up their phone number real quick, because I want to share that. For anyone watching, if you know a service member in need, or even if you know someone who doesn't think they're in need yet, encourage them to write down this website, girights.hotline.org, or their phone number, 1-877 1-877-447-4487. Again, that is 1-877-447-4487. And also, if they're calling from overseas, do they have a different number? I believe they do. I don't see it on the website, but they do have a different number for that. Anyway, the grightshotline.org. So those folks are doing the critical role of triage. This is a non-governmental organization, nonprofit, a network of people who are answering the calls, not attorneys, but very skilled folks helping service members to know how to engage with the regulations, knowing the beginnings of how they can exercise their own rights that they have under the law. And there's other groups out there as well, but GI Rights Hotline really stands out to me in this regard. But beyond that, there's so many situations where you get into questions of actual resistance, of soldiers, service members of all types, deciding to question, should I obey orders? Should I seek conscientious objector status? All of those questions are tough ones. And those groups, group that's near and dear to us at the Objector Church is Courage to Resist, that helps whistleblowers, military resistors, conscientious objectors. And we stand ready to help in many different situations. But again, the problem is going to be infrastructure. Will there be enough support when those calls come? And there's lots of other groups. Our friends at the Center for Conscience in War in Washington, D.C., lots of groups out there. But what I think we're all facing is looking at the reality of that if there is a continued surge of interest, continued surge of people needing help, will we be ready? And so I'm going to encourage anyone who's watching that if you have the opportunity to support these groups, it's important to do so. The timing is really critical. And a lot of these groups, they have a good number of volunteers ready. That's the good news. The bad news is that it costs money to run a toll-free phone system with a GI Rights network. With Courage to Resist, a lot of work there is we help to find lawyers who can take on these cases. And these cases are involved. These are not just quick little cases. These are pretty involved. And so very few lawyers can afford to do more than one of these cases a year on a pro bono basis. And so there has to be some pay involved. And so we'll encourage you, if you're looking for something good to contribute to, particularly during this winter holiday season, when a lot of us think, well, what can I do to make the world better? And why am I spending so much money for holiday presents for people that won't like them anyway? Well, if you feel that way, instead give it to something that you know will do some good. I encourage you to look at giving to Courage to Resist, or GI Rights Hotline, or some of these other groups. It's just really important. And really, I can't help but believe that looking at the trends, how things are shaping up right now, that if that infrastructure isn't there in place, we may be in a really difficult situation. Well, I'm now let's real quick, I'm gonna check over on the Zoom and Facebook, see if we've had any comments, questions that we will read off, and before we get done with today's program. I should also mention, as you can see, we're running initially we put these together, we were thinking these would be consistently 30-minute programs, but the way it's all worked, it's been tends to be a little bit longer. So we're probably running closer to an hour. So I just want to let folks know we are kind of doing that, but because we have a good interview, it's hard to cut them short. So, okay. I do have one comment here from Serena Blaze. She posts, there are several films that use dance to represent the themes of resistance or individuality. I particularly like Strictly Ballroom. There's also, of course, Footloose. So that was from Serena Blaze. Also, Jeff Patterson, he's provided a link on our Facebook page for this Facebook Live event, has a link to the original flamenco dance video. It's much better quality than we had in the live feed. So if you want to watch it, it's really, to me, what was frustrating in watching the live feed was the dance was beautiful, but I couldn't really hear the music. And it's the synergy, the combination of the two that really, to me, is what makes flamenco so moving. So I encourage you, if you liked what you saw, watch the original video. It'll really get you. And of course, when we do this in recorded format later, we're going to edit in and put the original video in, so it'll be much better quality. So, well, I think we are done for today. We thank you so much for tuning in. And again, if you're watching later in recorded format, again, join the conversation. We'll have this up on Facebook. We'll have it on YouTube, various platforms. And occasionally, we try to go back and look at the past comments and join the conversation as well. And finally, if you're interested in the classes we'll be offering very soon, I encourage you to follow our Facebook page for the Objector Church. Those will be starting hopefully next week or two. Got 2 classes in the works. One is a class I'm calling a daily psalm, looking at the Jewish and Christian scriptures of the Psalms, but looking at them through a variety of literary, historical lenses, from a feminist lens, from variety of different lenses. So that's one of the classes. The other one we're looking at, and again, it's contingent on me getting the teacher lined up. I'm really hoping he'll say yes. Still waiting. But it'll be a class on the Tao Te Ching, a work from ancient China that I think has a lot of relevance for today. And then we have several other classes we're hoping to put together soon as well. Classes on practical things for activists, classes for parents on how to parent children when you don't want them religiously indoctrinated, but you do want them to be religiously aware and educated. And so those are all in the works. We have a lot more coming, but anyway, we're excited about what's happening and hope you'll be too. So again, follow us on Facebook or visit our website, Objector.Church. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.